Good morning, beautiful people. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a beautiful Thursday morning. Welcome to Morning Spring on Western Spring Television. Daniel Emeka is my name. Here we talk about Project Nigeria. We talk about everything, how we can make Nigeria great, how we can make Nigeria better. We start with the newspaper review segment. Then, of course, we dive into critical matters. And like I always say, if it truly matters, you get to hear it from us right here on Morning Spring at Western Spring Television. It's always a pleasure to know that you are right there, always there. Join us every weekday on this show, and we do not take you for granted. Once again, if it truly matters, you get to hear it from us, and we say it as it is. That is one thing about Morning Spring. We say it as it is. We have those, uncomfortable conversations with critical stakeholders, looking at matters that affect us as a people. The Nigerian project, how can we make it work? It's not just about constructive criticisms. We also try to proffer solutions to the myriads of problems we are facing as a nation. And of course, Nigeria will be great again. Wherever you join us from this morning, I'd like to say a very big morning to you. For those joining outside Nigeria, whether it's in the afternoon or evening, whatever time it is right there where you are highly appreciated. Thank you once again for joining us on the program today. Quite a lot to talk about, recent happenings in the country. For instance, the Free Nnamdi Kanu protest, which started on Monday in Abuja and some southeastern states. Some people were arrested. And we had a conversation right here. On Monday, we had a legal practitioner. We talked about it, the use of force, in some cases, excessive force by police officers. And the fact remains, we can't just look at those occurrences in isolated cases. Sometimes we need to dive deep and look into the root causes of how people actually act the way they do. Nigerians are stressed. Nigerians are going through a lot. We all know about the economic hardship that we are facing in the nation. So quite a lot of factors, affect people. People are stressed. People are experiencing burnout and so many different forms of stress. And today on the show, we'll be talking about a lot more about those issues that really affect us as a people, diving deep, looking at critical factors that affect how people behave. Yesterday, we had an interview. We talked to someone who had an unfortunate encounter with some, police officers. He was seemingly brutalized. He was handcuffed. Someone threatened to kill him just because he decided to embark on a protest. But he also acknowledged the fact that there are some very good officers in the country. I know that for sure. They're very fine gentlemen in the military, in the Nigerian police, in the DSS. But again, we still have those who act sometimes irrationally. And I said it right here on the program yesterday that it happens everywhere. Okay, in every organization, you might find, one or two people who might be acting in a way, in a manner as if they are mentally deranged. But that topic is not something we talk about here a lot, especially in this part of the world. In Nigeria, when you talk about mental health issues, people try to sweep it under the carpet, because of the stigma. Like I said, when you look at people's reactions, sometimes you don't just judge it at surface level. We need to dive deeper, understand why people actually act the way they do. A lot of factors affecting Nigerians at this time, a lot of factors contributing to the stress Nigerians are facing. And I've said it before that we cannot afford to have a revolution because there is no such thing as a peaceful revolution. Mark my word, there is no such thing anywhere in the world as a peaceful or bloodless revolution. No, it never happens. That is why we have to do all it takes to address the root causes and make sure that there is calm in the nation, that there is peace and unity. And that is exactly what we do right here on the program. Once again, thank you for joining us. And of course, Daniel Emeka is my name. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we dive straight into the front pages of the newspaper. Please stay with us.
I am Josh Too Funny. I'm a comedian and I like to make people laugh. Fly up! But it's not funny that we're losing our unique gorillas. We only have around 100 left and they are threatened by habitat loss and traps set for bushmeat. So please say no to illegal bushmeat because protecting nature protects us all.
Thank you for staying with us. The newspapers are here. Let's dive straight into the front pages of the Nigerian newspapers this morning. We start from the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper. On the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, Electoral Act Amendments. Electoral Act Amendments. Senate proposes mandatory electronic transmission of results. Senate proposes mandatory electronic transmission of results. You find details of that story starting from the front page and of course on page pages 3 and 4. Now this is a good one. This is a very good one. The Nigerian Senate proposing electronic transmission of results. This is quite this is coming timely. I recall we had a conversation right here. I remember, having an interview with Mr. Bukola Idowu, the Executive Director of Impact Initiative, Development Initiative, and we had this conversation. We talked about this, especially making electronic transmission of election results mandatory. And thankfully, the Nigerian Senate is looking in that direction. This is a good one. When we have electronic transmission of results in Nigeria, election results in Nigeria being made mandatory, then of course it will bridge the gap, between the to reduce the discrepancies we usually have from collation centers, from polling units, to collation centers where figures are being changed. But when election results are transmitted electronically, real time, it removes that opportunity, for, changing of figures and all that. So this is quite a good one. If electronic transmission of results, election results in Nigeria is made mandatory, this is one great electoral reform. I'm still on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Under that banner red line, below it we have some riders. Section 82, subsection 2, amended to make notices of political party conventions and congresses more specific and time-bound. Then, of course, Section 10, subsection 2C, adds the national identification number. National identification number, that's the NIN, as part of the requirements for voter registration. Then, of course, we have Sections 12, subsection 1D, and of course, Section 12, subsection 2, recognize the voting rights of inmates, provided INEC makes adequate arrangements for their registration and participation in elections. Then Section 27, subsections 5 to 7, prescribes clear notice and timetables for elections, mandating that presidential and governorship elections be held no later than 185 days before the expiration of the incumbent's tenure. Now, this is quite impressive. This is what we've been talking about. We need electoral reforms in Nigeria. It can't be overemphasized. We need electoral reforms now in Nigeria. And we do sincerely hope that this bill is assented to, is passed on the floor of the Senate, and of course assented to by the president, because that's what we need. We're talking about good governance, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about integrity, and we cannot have all those without a transparent system. Talking about the independent National Electoral Commission, and of course, if we have these reforms, it will go a long way to renew the hope of the people as far as their faith in the electoral process in Nigeria is concerned. Away from that banner red line, moving on to other stories, still on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. On the bottom strip, How I lost 8 relatives to Niger tanker explosion. How I lost 8 relatives to Niger tanker explosion. Quite an unfortunate one right there. Then on the bottom strip, ISWAP threats. Security forces comb Ondo, Kogi forests. ISWAP threats. Security forces comb Ondo, Kogi forests. You find details of that story on page 12. Northern PDP governors, others endorse Turaki for national chair. Northern PDP governors, others endorse Turaki for national chair. You find details of that story on page 37. Dangote plans sale of 10% stake in refinery. Dangote plans sale of 10% stake in refinery. You find details of that story on page 24. What exactly is happening? Why is Dangote planning to sell 10% stake of the refinery? You might want to find out. And of course, if you're interested, you should start putting your funds together. This might just be an opportunity for you to tap into that that pipeline. Absolutely, quite a profitable business, if you ask me. And that'll be all from the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, the banner headline, ISWAP threats. Southwest, North Central states on high alert. ISWAP threat, Southwest, North Central states on high alert. Below that, we have a rider, governors, police tighten surveillance, and Ayedatiwa, I beg your pardon, I'll take that again. Governors, police tighten surveillance as Ayedatiwa Ododo. Others urge calm amid ISWAP threats alert. Talking about ISWAP threats, right there, you find details of that story on page 2. Of course, ISWAP is a terrorist organization, Islamic State of West Africa province. Right there, we have some fresh threats in Nigeria. You might want to read up details of that story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Away from the banner headline, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper. On the top strip, reps probe Jonathan's $460 million CCTV project. Reps probe Jonathan's $460 million CCTV project. You find details of that story on page 41. Talking about former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, we understand that the House of Reps are trying to probe a project on CCTV, that's closed circuit television cameras, that cost about $460 million. Now the reps want to probe. The question is, what took you so long? I mean, Jonathan left office a long time ago. That's not to say that if there is any form of corruption, it should be, condoned. No, but again, we should be proactive as a people. I mean, we should be looking into these projects real time. Okay, that's what transparency is all about. When we have projects approved by the federal government, by state government, by local government, there should be a measure of monitoring and evaluation real time, just to ensure that the people are not shortchanged. Now we're talking about a probe of a project that costs about $460 million. That's quite a huge one. We do hope they come up with reasonable results. Away from that, moving on to other stories, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Electoral reforms. Senate pushes INEC to defend election results. Electoral reforms. Senate pushes INEC to defend election results. With the rider, Tinubu swears in Amokwito today. You find details of that story on pages 2 and 41. So Mr. President will be swearing in the new Independent National Electoral Commissioner boss, that's the INEC National Chairman, Professor Joash Amokwito, today. Of course, he will be taking over from the outgoing chairman, Professor Mahmood, who has spent 10 years as 2 terms in office. And we do wish Professor Joash Amokwiton a good stay in office. Nigerians are expecting a lot. Nigerians are looking up to him. We have so many elections coming up. And of course, Anambra elections coming up next month. That's talking about November 8th. Anambra governorship elections has been described as a litmus test for the new INEC chairman, Professor Joash Amokwiton. And all eyes are watching. Nigerians are watching. The world is watching. They want to see how exactly we intend to make elections credible, free and fair in Nigeria. Away from that, moving on to other stories, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Sanwo-Olu monarch hail Oyebanji road inauguration. Sanwo-Olu monarch hail Oyebanji at road inauguration. And you can see the picture right there at that road inauguration. And on the bottom strip, terrorism trial. Kanu lists Wike, Sanwo-Olu, Buratai among 23 witnesses. Terrorism trial. Kanu lists Wike, Sanwo-Olu, Buratai among 23 witnesses. You find details of that story on page 3. Talking about the IPOB leader, Nnamdi Kanu, who a lot of Nigerians are agitating for his release at this time. Talking about the Free Nnamdi Kanu movement. Now he has named a couple of witnesses in his trial. The Lagos State Governor, the FCT Minister, and of course a lot of Nigerians will be wondering what exactly is happening. You might want to read up details of that story on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. Away from that, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, we take this final story. Okay, perhaps 2 more. Stray bullet kills tricycle rider outside Lagos brothel. Stray bullet kills Lagos tricycle rider outside Lagos brothel. You'll find details of that story on pages 4 and 5. And finally, from the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, Elumelu champions private sector as catalyst for growth. Elumelu champions private sector as catalyst for growth. You find details of that story on page 34. Talking about Mr. Tony Elumelu, the chairman of Heirs Holdings. Of course, he has always been, championing business across Africa, entrepreneurship and so on. And now he's talking about, private sector as catalyst for growth. You might want to read up details of that story on page 34 of the Punch newspaper this morning. And that'll be all from the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the front page of the Nation newspaper. On the Nation newspaper this morning, federal government to reform revenue collection, pricing of services. Federal government moves to reform revenue collection, pricing of services. Of course, you find details of that story starting from the front page of the Nation newspaper this morning. Below that banner red line, we have a couple of riders. Finance Ministry launches FFR. After that again, Finance Ministry launches FIR, CBS, REVA. Pilot scheme begins in 10 agencies. Measures to end leakages and enthrone transparency. Measures to end leakages, enthrone transparency. Talking about the federal government's move to reform revenue collection in Nigeria. Away from the banner red line, moving to the top strip of the Nation newspaper this morning. Kanu lists governors, ministers, military chiefs as witnesses. Kanu lists governors, ministers, military chiefs as witnesses. You find details of that story on page 3. Talking about the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, listing Nigerian governors, ministers, and others as witnesses in his trial. You might want to find out exactly what is going on by picking up the Nation newspaper and reading up that story on page 3. Away from that story, moving on to other stories still on the front page of the Nation newspaper this morning. Foreign portfolios triple to 1.8 trillion naira all-time high in third quarter. Foreign portfolio triple to 1.8 trillion naira all-time high in quarter 3. You find details of that story on page 3 of the Nation newspaper this morning. Don't panic over DSS terror alerts. Ondo, Kogi tell residents. Don't panic over DSS terror alerts. Ondo, Kogi tell residents. I'm talking about terror alerts coming from the Department of State Services, the DSS. Now, if the government of Ondo State and Kogi are telling the residents not to panic, is it enough for you just to tell residents not to panic? What specific steps are you taking to ensure the people are safe? What strategic moves are you making to ensure the protection of lives and property? It's not enough for you to tell people not to panic. Of course, there's a terrorist threat. There's a threat coming from the DSS, Department of Safe Services, and of course, something should be done about it. Assure the people that they are safe, so that we don't have, as we say here in Nigeria, stories that touch. Away from that, moving on to other stories. Still on the front page of the Nation newspaper this morning. How Yakubu's innovations ensured credible 2023 polls by IPAC chair. How Yakubu's innovations ensured credible 2023 polls by IPAC chair. You might want to read up details of that story on the front page of the Nation newspaper. And finally, on the bottom strip, on the red strip, ASU suspends warning strike. Oh, thank goodness. This is great news, of course. The Academic Staff Union of Universities have suspended their warning strike because this is one strike too many. We've had too many strikes in Nigeria. When students have their academic calendars disrupted, when they're supposed to write exams after preparations, then exams are postponed indefinitely as a result of strike, it does no one no good. And thankfully, the Academic Staff Union of Universities have decided to suspend their strike. And we do hope that they come to a logical conclusion. Now that a couple of months later, we start hearing about another strike. What sense would that make? Of course, no sense at all. So thankfully, the strike has been suspended, and we do hope that it is sustained. We're talking about reforms generally in Nigeria later on in the program this morning. Please, just stay with us. Away from that, I'm still on that red strip. So apart from ASU suspending their warning strike, Senate okays bill to double health funding. Senate, I beg your pardon, okays bill to double health funding. You find details of that story on page 4. Bill to double health funding. Quite a good one, if you ask me. And Nigerians are waiting to see. Well, that'll be all from the front page of the Nation newspaper. Next, we take a look at the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. On the Nigerian Tribune this morning, ISWAP threat. Kogi, Ondo move to douse tension. ISWAP threat. Kogi, Ondo move to douse tension. You find details of that story on page 11. Below that, we have a couple of riders. Strategic security measures reinforced. Surveillance intensified, Kogi. That's exactly what I want to hear. That's what I talked about a couple of seconds ago. That what strategic steps are being taken to make sure that people are safe. Because it's not just enough to tell them that they shouldn't panic. Now we understand that strategic security measures are being taken, of course, to reinforce and, of course, surveillance intensified across Kogi State. That's quite a positive one. And below that, we are in constant contact with security agencies. Ondo, we are in constant contact with security agencies coming from the Ondo State government. Away from the banner red line, moving to the top strip of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning. ASU suspends 2-week warning strike. Rejects 35% salary increase offer. Academic Staff Union of Universities suspends 2-week warning strike. Rejects 35% salary increase offer. You find details of that story on page 3, with the writer gives federal government 1 month window to address demands. Here we go again. The Academic Staff Union of Universities are giving the federal government of Nigeria a 1 month window to address their concerns. Just 1 month. So come on, we don't want to see another strike again. Now, if ASU, that's the Academic Staff Union of Universities, if they are rejecting a 35% salary increase, then what exactly are they demanding? What do they want? You might want to pick up the Nigerian Tribune and read up details of that story, of course, on page 3. Away from that, IMPI reverse inflation rate projection to 14% from 17% for December. Talking about inflation rate projection. You find details of that story on page 6. Moving on to other stories. Election petition. Senate to shift burden of proof to INEC. Election petition. Senate to shift burden of proof to INEC. I'm just talking about the Independent National Electoral Commission to bear the burden of proof as far as election petitions are concerned in Nigeria. You find details of that story on page 3. Then on the health section, we have being too skinny might kill quicker than obesity. Oh boy, this is quite interesting. Being too skinny might kill quicker than obesity. Coming from a study, you find details on page 11, talking about those who are obese. Now, this report is saying that being too skinny might actually be more dangerous. Now, this is interesting. I'm saying this for the first time. You might want to read up the details of that on page 11 of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. Talking about health. Of course, when you talk about health and how it affects you, I ask people a lot of times when I interact with people, most people don't even know their BMI. That's their body mass index. It's very important for you to know your BMI. It helps you know whether you're underweight, whether your weight is okay, whether you're overweight. And there's actually a simple calculation to do that. Just know your weight in kilogram, divide by the square of your height in meters. That's all you have to do is get your height in meters. Most times you measure your height in feet and inches. Just convert it to meters. So you have your height in meters, square of it. For instance, if it's 1.70 meters, that'll be 1.70 times 1.70. That's the square of your height in meters. Then you divide that with your age, with your weight rather, your weight in kilograms. So if you're weighing 80 kilograms, then divided by the square of your height in meters, you get your body mass index. That's just a simple calculation that will give you something, close to your body mass index. And of course, if your BMI is less than 20, you're underweight. If your BMI is between 20 to 25, that's your body mass index, then your weight is okay. Then once it is from 25 and above, you're overweight. Then once your body mass index starts approaching 30, then you are obese. These are some, health indicators that you should have handy just for you to be healthy. It's all about, they say, health is wealth, and that cannot be overemphasized. That'll be all from the front page of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. And that also brings us to a conclusion of the newspaper review segment. We'll take a quick break. When we return, we dive into other critical matters. Join us again.